A client of mine believed that taking home a free rabbit from a neighbor's litter meant the expensive part of owning one was already behind her. It was not. It had barely begun. She had budgeted for a hutch and a bag of food, spent perhaps $60 in total, and assumed that covered it. 18 months later, she sat in my consulting room, genuinely startled, adding up what the rabbit had actually cost her so far, once housing, hay, litter, vet visits, and a dozen chewed possessions were counted honestly. Her honest total for those 18 months landed well over $1,000, more than 15 times what she had originally budgeted for the entire rabbit. She had not been careless. She had simply never been told the real numbers by anyone with a reason to tell her. That gap between what people expect and what a rabbit actually costs across its life is not an accident. Pet stores and breeders have every reason to keep the sticker price low and say nothing about the 10 years that follow it. A cheap animal is an easy sale. A cheap animal is almost never a cheap decade. I want to be clear that this is not an argument against ever getting a rabbit. Rabbits are genuinely wonderful animals, and thousands of owners manage the real cost comfortably every single year. This is an argument against getting one without ever seeing the real numbers first, the way my client never did until it was already too late to plan for them. I am Finn. I work with exotics and small mammals, and I would rather you hear the honest total from me before you commit to a rabbit than hear it from your own bank statement 2 years in, the way my client did. Here is the mechanism behind why this catches so many people out. A rabbit is not a short commitment. A well-kept house rabbit routinely lives 8 to 12 years, sometimes longer, which puts its lifespan closer to a dog's than to the hamster or goldfish most people mentally file it alongside when they picture the cost. Every single recurring cost on this list, hay, litter, routine vet care, gets multiplied by that same long number of years. A cost that looks trivial per week becomes a genuinely large total once you multiply it out honestly across a decade, and almost nobody does that math before bringing a rabbit home. There is a second reason this catches people specifically. Most of the true cost is recurring rather than upfront. A dog or a cat owner at least sees a large early cost, from vaccination courses to training, that signals the animal is expensive. A rabbit's early cost looks small, and the real expense arrives quietly, spread thin across a decade of ordinary weeks. That is exactly what makes it so easy to underestimate at the start. I want to walk through 10 real cost categories, roughly in the order a new owner actually meets them, so you can see the true decade total rather than just the sticker price at the start. For each one, I will give you what it actually covers, the specific detail that changes the number, and a realistic range so you have something concrete to plan against rather than a guess. Number 1. The initial setup, enclosure, and safe space. A properly sized enclosure with room to fully stretch out and take at least a few hops in every direction, plus daily supervised time outside it, is not the small cage most pet stores sell alongside a starter rabbit. Building or buying an adequately sized setup, including a litter area, hideaway and feeding station, is the single biggest upfront cost most new owners underestimate. Owners who buy the cheap starter cage almost always replace it within the first year once they realize how genuinely undersized it is, which means paying for housing twice rather than once. Buying the correct size from day one is cheaper across the full decade, even though it looks like the more expensive option on day one. The specific detail worth knowing. A correctly sized setup, built or bought once and done properly, typically runs somewhere between $100 and $300 total. The undersized starter cage that gets replaced within the year often ends up costing more in total once you count both purchases. Number 2. Spaying or neutering. This is not optional if you want a calmer, healthier, more litter-reliable rabbit, and it is a real cost most new owners have not budgeted for at all when they picture the animal as simply the price on the store tag. Speak to your own vet about timing and cost specific to your rabbit and your area. Skipping this step does not save money across the decade. Unneutered rabbits carry higher lifetime health risks and far worse litter habits, both of which tend to cost more later than the procedure itself would have cost early. A rabbit-specific spay or neuter, since the procedure differs from a cat or dog, often runs somewhere between $200 and $400, depending on your area and your rabbit's individual case. Number 3. Hay, the single largest recurring cost, and the one most worth budgeting properly. Unlimited good quality grass hay should make up the majority of a rabbit's daily diet for its entire life. And it is a weekly, not occasional purchase. Cutting corners here to save money is the single most common mistake I see, because hay is also the primary driver of healthy teeth and digestion, and skimping on it tends to show up later as a much larger vet bill. Budget hay as a real, permanent monthly line item, the same way you would budget for your own groceries rather than an occasional top-up purchase. A single rabbit fed properly typically works through somewhere around $15 to $25 of hay every single month, which sounds modest until you multiply it across a full decade and land on a genuinely large total. Number 4. Litter and bedding replaced constantly for a decade. This is a small cost per week that becomes substantial once multiplied across 10 years of continuous replacement. Safe, rabbit-appropriate litter is not the cheapest option on the shelf, and using an unsafe, cheaper alternative to save money here is a hazard, not a saving, since some common litters are unsafe if a rabbit ingests them while grooming. The specific detail worth knowing. Paper-based or wood pellet litters, the safest options, typically run somewhere around $10 to $15 a month for one rabbit. Choosing the unsafe, cheap option to save perhaps $5 a month risks an emergency vet bill many times larger than anything saved. Number 5. Routine veterinary care every single year of the rabbit's life. An annual wellness check, and for many rabbits a second visit partway through the year, is the routine cost baseline before anything ever goes wrong. Many owners only budget for a vet visit when their rabbit is visibly unwell. That means the first vet bill of a rabbit's life often lands during a genuine emergency rather than during a calm, cheaper, preventive visit. A routine wellness visit with a rabbit-savvy vet typically runs somewhere between $50 and $100, a fraction of what an emergency visit for the same underlying issue tends to cost once it has been allowed to develop unnoticed. If you want clear cost breakdowns that help you plan before a pet becomes an emergency, subscribe to the channel. Number 6. An emergency fund because something eventually needs it. Rabbits are prey animals that hide illness well, and a genuine emergency, most commonly a gut slowdown condition called stasis, can arrive with little warning and require urgent, same-day veterinary attention. Setting aside a modest amount every single month specifically for this, rather than hoping it never happens, is the difference between a manageable bill and a genuine financial shock. An emergency visit involving overnight monitoring or fluid support can run into several $100s in a single visit. Setting aside even $20 a month, untouched until it is actually needed, builds a genuine cushion across a full year without ever feeling like a large single expense. Number 7. Chew toys, enrichment, and the things a bored or understimulated rabbit destroys instead. A rabbit that does not have enough safe things to chew and dig at will find its own targets, and those targets are usually your furniture, your baseboards, and your electrical cords. Budgeting properly for enrichment is genuinely cheaper across the decade than replacing what an under-enriched rabbit chooses to chew instead. A reasonable monthly enrichment budget, safe wood chews and digging boxes included, typically sits around $10 to $20, far below the cost of a single chewed piece of furniture. Number 8. Rabbit-proofing your actual living space. Cord covers, furniture guards, and blocking off certain areas entirely are a real, mostly one-time cost that new owners rarely price in before bringing a rabbit home. Skipping this step does not remove the cost, it simply moves the cost onto whatever the rabbit ends up chewing instead, which is usually more expensive than the proofing would have been. A thorough one-time proofing pass for an average room, cord covers and furniture guards included, typically runs somewhere between $50 and $150. One chewed phone charger cable or a single damaged table leg often costs more than that entire proofing job would have. Number 9. Boarding or a qualified sitter whenever you travel. A rabbit cannot simply be left with an automatic feeder the way some pets can. Since fresh hay, water, and daily monitoring genuinely matter for a species prone to sudden digestive problems. Specialist small animal boarding, or a sitter who actually understands rabbit care, costs real money every single time you travel. Expect somewhere around $15 to $25 per day for a qualified sitter or specialist boarding. A recurring travel cost most new owners never factor into their trip budgeting at all. Number 10. Senior care in the later years when costs quietly climb. Costs are rarely flat across a rabbit's whole life. As a rabbit ages, particularly past 6 or 7, dental checks, mobility support, and general veterinary attention tend to increase in both frequency and individual cost. Budgeting the same flat amount for year 1 and year 10 is the single most common planning mistake, and it is exactly backwards since the later years are usually the more expensive ones. A reasonable rule of thumb is to plan for routine veterinary costs to roughly double in a rabbit's last 2 or 3 years compared to its healthy middle years, purely from the added monitoring an aging body genuinely needs. This is not a reason to worry about adopting an older rabbit either. An older rescue rabbit often has fewer years of that higher cost ahead of it than a young rabbit will eventually reach, and many wonderful calm companions are sitting in rescues right now for exactly this reason, overlooked simply because of their age. One more category worth naming honestly. A second rabbit, since rabbits are social animals that generally do best paired, roughly doubles most of the recurring categories above rather than simply adding a flat extra cost. Hay litter, vet visits, and boarding all scale with the number of rabbits, even though housing and summon time costs do not scale quite as steeply. Add all 10 of these together honestly across 8 to 12 years, and the true total sits far above the sticker price that got someone through the door in the first place. Even using conservative numbers from every category above, a full decade of proper rabbit ownership commonly totals somewhere in the range of several $1,000s once every category is counted. That is far beyond the $60 my client originally budgeted. That gap is not a coincidence. It is the entire reason the sticker price stays low. Here is something worth doing tonight if you already own a rabbit, or before you bring one home if you do not yet. Open a spreadsheet or even a plain notebook page and write down every category above with a real monthly number next to it. Use an actual number from a real receipt or a real quote from your own vet, not a guess pulled from memory. A guess is exactly what got my client into that consulting room 18 months in, genuinely startled by a total she had never once written down. Multiply your monthly recurring total by 12 for a real annual figure. As a rough worked example, hay litter and enrichment alone often land somewhere around $45 a month for one rabbit, which comes to roughly $540 a year before you have even added a single vet visit or emergency fund contribution. Add your annual routine vet visit, your emergency fund contribution, and a share of the one-time costs spread across the years they cover, and most owners land somewhere between $600 and $1,000 a year in an ordinary year where nothing goes wrong. Multiply that annual figure by 10 and you have a real decade total, not a guess. Most owners who do this honestly for the first time are surprised by the total, and that surprise is far better to have on paper tonight than to have it arrive as an actual unpaid bill 2 years from now. Write the number down somewhere you will see it again, not just in a spreadsheet you close and forget. Set up a small automatic monthly transfer into a separate savings account earmarked specifically for this rabbit, sized against the real number you just calculated rather than a guess. Even a modest, consistent transfer, treated the same way you would treat a genuine household bill, adds up to real protection across a full year. That single habit, more than any other single thing on this list, is what turns a decade of rabbit ownership from a financial surprise into something genuinely manageable and worth every dollar of it. It is the difference between a bill that stresses you and a bill you already planned for. If you are still deciding whether to bring a rabbit home at all, this same worksheet works just as well before the decision as after it. Running the real numbers first, rather than after the rabbit is already living in your spare room, is the single best financial decision a new owner can make, and it costs nothing but 20 honest minutes with a calculator. It also protects the rabbit itself, not just your budget. In my own practice, unexpected cost is a reason I hear often when an owner is genuinely struggling to keep providing proper care, and it is nearly always a situation that honest math at the very start would have prevented before the animal's whole world depended on it. Before I close, one thing I want to mention once. My practice put together a full printable 10-year cost worksheet with every category on this list, broken down by typical monthly range, so you are working from real numbers rather than guesswork. It is linked below this video if you want it. That is the only mention I will make of it. If you take one thing from this video, make it the honest math tonight, not the sticker price at the store. A rabbit is a wonderful, genuinely rewarding, decade-long commitment when the real cost is planned for honestly from the start. It becomes a source of real financial stress only when nobody adds up the true total until it has already arrived, one unexpected bill at a time. Do the math tonight, while it is still just numbers on a page and not an unpaid bill in your hand. Your rabbit has no way of knowing the numbers behind its own care. That part is entirely yours to plan for, and doing it honestly is one of the kindest things you can do for an animal that is depending on you for the whole of its long life.